Hey guys, welcome back to the Willem's World YouTube channel, and today we have another tier list. We're looking at every single Paradox Pokemon from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and the way it works is that in Pokemon Scarlet, the professor has a time machine and he brings Pokemon from the past, so ancient Pokemon, into the present, and on the flip side of that, in Violet, he brings Pokemon from the future into the present. And you have to basically stop him from doing that because it's causing time ruptures and causing the fabric of time and reality to sort of crack and bend and break, and essentially having these Pokemon run free in the region of Paldea is probably going to completely destroy it. So that's kind of what you're in the end game is what you're required to do. Obviously, I played through Pokemon Violet on stream on a series. I've not actually played through Scarlet at all. When I first got the games, it was very difficult for me to decide between Scarlet and Violet because I think personally, based on the Paradox Pokemon, I generally speaking prefer the ancient forms. However, the returning Pokemon, the sort of regular Pokemon that were returning, I preferred the ones that were on the Violet side of it, so I went that way because I thought realistically I'm not going to be catching many iron, future Pokemon, and I was right. So there's 22 in total. We have Great Tusk, which is an ancient form of Donphan. I do have a little thing in front of me that tells me what their name is, what the ancient form of it is, and their types. So for Paradox Pokemon, generally speaking, they keep one type from their original list, their normal Pokemon, and they gain a new type in, so they're all dual typing, but I'll go through that as I sort of talk about them individually. I'll talk about their typing, things like that. So as I said, Great Tusk, which is an ancient Donphan, Screamtail, which is an ancient Jigglypuff, we've got Brute Bonnet, which is an ancient Amoonguss, Fluttermane, which is an ancient Misdreavus, we've got Slitherwing, which is ancient Volcarona, Sandy Shocks, which is ancient Magneton, Roaring Moon, which is ancient Salamence, Koraidon, which is obviously the box art legendary for Scarlet, and Miraidon is for Violet. They're actually Paradox forms, past and present, of Cyclizar, Walking Wake, which I'm pretty sure is Suicune, an ancient version, Raging Bolt, which is Raikou, and Gouging Fire, which is Entei. And we've got Iron Treads, which is a future version of Donphan, Iron Bundle, which is a future version of Delibird, Iron Hands, which is Hariyama, Iron Jugulus, which is Hydreigon, Iron Moth, which is Volcarona as well, Iron Thorns, which is Tyranitar, Iron Valiant, which is Glade. Pretty sure it's not Gardevoir, Glade, whichever one it is. Miraidon, which like I said is Cyclizar. Then you've got Iron Leaves, which is Virizion, Iron Crown, which is Cobalion, and Iron Boulder, which is Terrakion. And those are the 22 Paradox Pokemon. Now the tiers I have here: top 3, great, good, meh, and not a fan. Now usually when I do Pokemon tier lists, they'd be top 5, but that's when I've done ones for Pokemon where there's been like 80 Pokemon to rank. Because there's only 22 for these, I thought I'd be a bit more I'd maybe what's the phrase I'm looking for? I'd be a bit more strict with who I put in the top tier. Like I said, I'll be honest, generally speaking, to do with the Paradox, I think all the way up to all the ancient ones, generally, I prefer. There are some which I'm not a fan of, but generally speaking, I like at least the design-wise. Not used them in game, but design-wise, I think is probably, to be honest, design-wise is one of the biggest parts for me. So, without further ado, let's get into actually ranking, and I'm going to start with one that I'm not a fan of. Now, I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know who is liked and disliked when it comes to Paradox Pokemon. I'm not really in the realm of, I'm not in part of the online community that like, I don't look at, you know, things like Pokemon Reddit and things like that. I'm like, I'm not super into the sort of community of that side of it. So let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments for this. But I am going to start off by putting Sandy Shocks in there. Firstly, the name Sandy Shocks, not a fan. I get it. It's an electric and ground type Pokemon. It obviously gets the electric typing from Magneton. Ground type, I'm guessing it's because obviously the ancient part of it and the fact its name comes from the sandy part, the name comes from it being ground type. It's got legs. It's just really weird. I think you could have done, there's quite a few other Pokemon that you could have done that isn't Magneton that would look less weird. I just think there's something about it. It's just really off for me. Not a fan at all. I think this is probably going to be my least favourite one. And like I said, in general, I do prefer the past versions, but I think this one is just absolutely horrendous. I don't know how it plays in game, but I'm not a fan. And actually, you know what? I'll even it out and I'll put a future one in there. Iron Bundle, Future Delibird, Water and Ice. I really dislike. The thing I think I dislike about a lot of the future ones is that they all just look like robots, which I get is maybe part of it, but you could have done something different with the design elements for the future ones that didn't just make them all look like robots. Because realistically, if you look at every single one, they're all called Iron something, except for Miraidon, and they're all metallic. They're all looking robot. They could all realistically be part steel type. They're not all part steel type, obviously, but they could be. And I think that's just part of the thing that I find, generally speaking, lacks for me in terms of the future Paradox Pokemon, is that it's very much turned into just, so the Iron Bundle is basically just Delibird but robotic, and that's just not for me. The one element I like of it is that the sack that he carries on his back when he's a Delibird becomes like a water cannon. That's pretty cool. Other than that, not really much to write home about. And yeah, that's going to be probably the only two that I would say are in not a fan. I'm going to now move on to Meh. And I think I can put in Meh quite a few. I'm going to start with Screamtail. For me, it's okay. So what is Screamtail's typing? Fairy and Psychic. Nice typing. I like fairy types. I like psychic types. Ancient Jigglypuff, obviously. The reason why it goes in Meh is because design-wise, specifically, I don't think there's enough different from Jigglypuff. It's just got a Jigglypuff with longer hair and different pupils. For me, it doesn't really do it. And I think that's going to be the same thing, generally speaking, for Fluttermane and Brute Bonnet. Brute Bonnet is basically a Amoonguss with like mossy green things coming down. And to be honest, I'm not really a huge fan of Amoonguss anyway. I don't really care much for him. Grass and Dark typing. And I think I'm actually going to put him in Meh as well. Like I say, I just don't think there's enough different about him to warrant it. If you're gonna, for me, I think if you're gonna turn a Pokemon into a Paradox Pokemon, you need to do something, at least with the future type Pokemons, the future Paradox Pokemon. They look, generally speaking, considerably different. But it wouldn't be fair to just put past Paradox Pokemon in there. But one more that is going in there is Raging Bolt. I'll be honest, Raikou is not a Pokemon anyway that I'm massively familiar with. I just think the Giraffe neck's really weird. It's Electric and Dragon, which I'm a big fan of electric typing, generally speaking, and also Dragon type. I don't think there's anything wrong with the typing itself. I just think, like I said, Raikou's not one that I've ever really been massively, I've not really cared much for. I'll be honest, it's going to sound really bad. I I can't remember what generation he's from, and I should have probably looked into that, but I didn't. And for me, that goes in there. But like I said, it would not be fair to only put past Paradox Pokemon in this. So I'm going to put Iron Jugulis in Meh, because Hydrangea I think is pretty cool. Iron Jugulis is dark and flying. So I like Hydrangea. I like how he goes from Dino to, I can't remember what the middle stage is called, but basically gains an extra head. He becomes like a Hydra, if you will. Hence the name, I suppose. And I just think it's too jagged, too I don't know. There's just something really off about it, offsetting. And I think also it looks worse so all of these images I've grabbed are like essentially animated from like as if like a cartoon sort of style of animation. The 3D models for a lot of the future ones look pretty bad in game, and I'm wondering if when they do the port for Nintendo Switch 2, maybe the console will be able to handle it a bit better and it will look better. But they just look very like jagged, rigid, and I think that's one of the things that Iron Jugulis suffers from. And also in Meh from the future versions, I'm also going to put Iron Leaves, who is Virizion, and Iron Crown, which is Cobalion, because I don't really, like I said, it's a similar thing that I have with Raikou. Not really got anything particularly interesting to say about those guys because I'm not really too fussed about them. But design-wise, they look like robots, and there's not really much more to say about that. And the final one that I am going to put into this category, so everything else is going in good and above, but the final one that's going in Meh is Iron Treads. I love Donphan as a Pokemon. I think Donphan is awesome. And I like that Donphan can roll. So he basically, his back, like he rolls into a circle and he can roll at opponents. Really like that as a design feature for Donphan. And I get what they were going with the Iron Treads, where it basically becomes like a tank tread around him and he rolls. But he just looks too round, too metallic, too shiny. There are ways you could have done some sort of like hybrid cyborg thing where he's like kind of fleshy but has sort of robotic elements to it maybe. There just needs to be something different than just robots, generally speaking. There are some actually though, some of the future designs I think are awesome. But Iron Treads is not one of them. Just too round for me, and especially when you've got great tusk. That's another thing as well. I feel like realistically, I get that you've chosen to do different Pokemon for past and future, but you've got Volcarona that's got a past and present form, and you've got Donphan who's got a past and present form. So you could maybe have gotten away with doing the same Pokemon and giving them each a past and present form. So I think it's weird that they've done that for some, but not all of them anyway. But Iron Treads is the final one in Meh because I think I like Donphan too much for it to not annoy me that he looks like that. Iron Treads is ground and steel, so he is actually, I think, if what I've written down is correct, the only steel type future Pokemon, which would potentially be surprising. Makes sense for them to be to be steel type, sorry. And I like that he's kept the ground typing as well. I think regular Donphan might be ground on rock. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, then ignore that. But yeah, anyway, we will move on to good. And I think there's quite a few that go into good. I think Fluttermane goes into good straight off the rip. Fluttermane is the past form of Misdreavus and is, I can't see it, Ghost and Fairy. I like that typing. Ghost is one of my favourite typings. So Fluttermane is good. I just think that something that stops it from being great is that there's not enough of like a design difference between Misdreavus and Fluttermane. Next is Iron Boulder. Iron Boulder is rock and psychic and is future Terrakion. Again, the legendaries that they brought out for the DLC. So the legendaries that are Paradox Pokemon, except for Miraidon and Koraidon. So you've got Iron Boulder, Iron Crown, Iron Leaves, Raging Bolt, Gouging Fire, and Walking Wake. They're all legendary Pokemons that came out in DLCs. I don't have any of the DLCs, so I've not actually seen them in game. And the legendaries that are there are not ones that I'm particularly familiar with. If there was like Paradox forms of the why can't I think of what they are? The legendary birds from Kanto and so on and so forth. Maybe I would have been more interested in those, but obviously they brought those back in Gen 8, so they're not going to just bring them back every time. I'm also going to put Gouging Fire in because I like the designs for Gouging Fire and Walking Wake, to be fair. I like the typing for Walking Wake, actually. Water and Dragon, big fan. And Gouging Fire is Fire Dragon. So 2 dragon types. I like that sort of he becomes a bit bipedal, looks a little bit like a Velociraptor type of pose that he's got going on. You know, I like my dinosaurs, so he's going there. And I think, I'll put Iron Valiant at the top. I really like this design, but I'm not a huge fan of Glade or Gardevoir really. Fairy fighting, I like the fighting type. I like the fact that it's got like a scythe almost looking type weapon. Big fan, but good. Now we've got 3 that are going to make their way into the top 3, and we've got, if I move them next to each other, we've got Slitherwing and Iron Moth. Now Slitherwing is going into great. Slitherwing is the ancient form of Volcarona, bug and fighting type. Interesting typing for it. And the Iron Moth is fire and poison. So Volcarona is bug fire. So one of them's kept the bug type in, obviously because Iron Moth is not a bug. It makes sense that they didn't keep the bug type in. Iron Moth, it's our first one in the top 3. I love this design, and I can't really explain what it is about it. It's just something about it. I think it's the wings. I think it looks sick. I don't know why. It just looks really cool. And I know I was whinging about all of them looking like robots, but I do really love that design. Slitherwing also looks good. I think they've done a really good job with both of these. But I do think Iron Moth is just a bit cooler. Next I'm going to talk about Iron Hands and Iron Thorns. I'll put them both next to each other because I really like both of these. I think the issue I have with Iron Hands is that his hands do look a bit clunky in game, and I think part of his leg looks really like it's like weirdly like angular. It's just a weird design thing that I've got in the game. So Tyranitar keeps his rock type in, so I think he's Rock Dragon if I'm not mistaken. He keeps the rock part and becomes Rock Electric, and Hariyama Iron Hands becomes Fighting and Electric. Again, like fighting type, big fan of fighting type, like electric type. He features relatively heavily in the Violet part of the game. Iron Thorns, I know you fight him when you fight the final boss type thing, but there's a bit before where a bunch of the future Pokemon come out and spoil out of the where the teleporter things is, and Iron Thorns is not part of that. It's Iron Hands, Iron Jugulis, and Iron Bundle comes out, I think, and I think that's all the 3 that come out of the actual thing. But yeah, I really like Hariyama anyway. So Iron Hands is and I like the design that his kind of hands are levitating; they're not attached. Kind of a big fan of that. Next, we're going to go Koraidon and Miraidon. So Koraidon is Fighting and Dragon, and Miraidon is Electric and Dragon. Both make sense. Koraidon's kind of got that design of like the sort of hairpiece, like it's sort of almost like a Native American hairpiece going down the spine. Probably not the inspiration, but I like it. And Miraidon is obviously a dragon that is electric. Not really much to say. The thing I'm not huge on to do with Miraidon and Koraidon, I'm not a huge fan that basically the box art legendary became a means of transport. So you basically find him at the beginning and you nurse him back to health, and you can help Arven with the Titan Pokemon, and you get Herba Mystica, and you feed them to Miraidon or Koraidon, and they gain a certain power, so they can glide, climb, get a boost, they can swim, things like that. But essentially the box art legendaries become a mode of transport. On top of that, I don't think that the box art legendaries should necessarily be paradox versions of a regular Pokemon, because these are a paradox version of Cyclizar, which is another Pokemon, by the way, that was introduced in Generation 9. Initially, I thought they weren't paradox Pokemon until I found a Cyclizar in game. I didn't realise that was a thing. So yeah, it just doesn't. That's why they don't reach top 3. I think Miraidon's close because I really love the design of Miraidon, but just the fact that it's a mode of transport rather than it being a legendary, like fucking cool legendary Pokemon. That's just why it doesn't quite reach top 3. And as you can see, Great Tusk and Roaring Moon make their way into the top 3, and they are 1 and 2. Great Tusk, obviously, like I said, big fan of Donphan. Great Tusk is Ground of Fighting. Roaring Moon is Dragon Dark. Dragon Dark is a cool type in. Roaring Moon, if you can't see the thumbnail very well, Roaring Moon looks really cool. Really, really cool. Awesome design. Salamence is cool anyway. Always like to use Salamence when I get the chance in my teams. I'm pretty sure actually in my Pokemon Violet playthrough I used Garchomp instead of Salamence. But the Roaring Moon design is really awesome. Like I said, Great Tusk. I think if you look at Great Tusk and Iron Treads side by side, you can see what I mean. Why they've done Iron Treads absolutely dirty, and they kind of lose the shape of Donphan in Iron Treads, and they've basically just made him like a mean-looking, nasty-looking Donphan, and it's very cool. And there you have it. That's my list. Not particularly long list, not an in-depth, obviously only 22. It seems very bottom heavy. I think the reason why so many of them are in meh is, like I said, I just don't connect with the legendary. I've not played the DLC, so I've never seen them in action. And the actual legendaries themselves are not legendaries I'm hugely familiar with. Over my time of playing Pokemon, I've not played every single generation ever. Shoot me. It's just not something that I've done in my time. I don't have the consoles and the means to do it anymore. But I've played as much as I can, and I'm always happy to play more if I can find them. I've been playing through Moon actually for the first time recently. But I'm not very far into it at the moment. I've got it on DS. Not that matters too much. And yeah, like I said, top 3: Great Tusk, Roaring Moon, Iron Moth, and as you can see, quite a few of, especially the higher end, are the ancient types. It's an interesting concept having these sort of paradox Pokemon. I just kind of wish when you fight Titans with Arven, you fight, I don't know what it's like for Scarlet, but you fight Iron Treads, and it's the only paradox Pokemon you fight during that. And I feel like they maybe, and then you go down into the center of the crater towards where the time machine is, and that's when they all sort of pile out and you start battling them and whatnot. And I just feel like it's an interesting idea. They could have incorporated it more into the actual game, so the Titans all could have been, so you could have fought Iron Thorns, you could have fought, so on and so forth, when you're getting the Herba Mystica. And it kind of just seems like they ended up being a bit of an afterthought aside from Miraidon and Koraidon, which even then seemed a little bit afterthoughty because they just were like, how are we going to get around this massive fucking map? But that's besides the point. Let me know if you agree or disagree, and I will be back on Monday for a stream. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. I might do some more Pokemon tier lists coming up, because I do enjoy doing them. I do enjoy just waffling about Pokemon for a while. Could do any other tier lists as well. Let me know in the comments if there's any specific tier lists you want me to tackle, whether Pokemon or not. I'll do them about food, I've done them about cheese, chocolate milk, I'll literally talk about anything. I could talk for hours. Call of Duty, anything. But I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you agree. Let me know any of your thoughts. I'm always up for a discussion in the comments. And I'll see you in the next one. So take care, everybody, and goodbye.